Today, we're going to get to the heart of deepening old friendships and also making new friends. I'm really excited about this, not because I just drank a cup of coffee in the afternoon. I never drink coffee in the afternoons. So, if you were to be open enough to confide in someone and say, "Oh, I'm trying to make more friends," chances are the first thing they're going to say is, "Well, what are your interests and hobbies? Can you meet more friends that way?" Someone said that to you, you just want to smack them because it's like, duh, tell me something I don't already know or haven't thought of already. Now, I'm not saying they're wrong. It's just that that piece of advice just feels so trite, thin, inadequate, just altogether unmotivating. So I'm not going to say that because I don't want to insult your intelligence. What we will talk about is some key principles about making and deepening friendships so that, I think the hobby and the interest is just a particular instantiation of that principle that should fall out of these general principles. I think the heart of the matter is making and deepening friendships takes two key ingredients. The first is regularity of interaction, and the second is energizing that relationship. Now, energizing a relationship takes many forms. It could be having fun together, having new experience together, having a crisis together, confiding in one another, being vulnerable with one another. It's a big topic. We're not going to get into it today, but just sort of file away in the back of your head. Energizing relationship is one key aspect of that ingredient. So today we're going to focus on the first key ingredient, which is regular time spent with one another. That's probably something you're already aware of, but hopefully we'll get into some detail and some actionable steps that maybe you haven't implemented yet. All right, so starting off, you may remember we talked about roughly 75% of people that I've spoken with talk about how college, grad school, and living with other people in that period was the most connecting period in their lives. And if you look back into your childhood, your friendships were kind of automatic because we had all this framework and structures for automatically spending a lot of regular time with one another. And nowadays, if you're a busy professional, that opportunity is much harder to come by. But I think that regularity interaction is super key to development of friendships. And I think sometimes we overestimate how big of a match we have to have friends. We may have these checklists for the type of friends we want and finding the type of friends. I think it's really a lot less about finding friends than growing friends. We may have much less in common with the friends than just the fact we spend a lot of time around one another and we just develop that bond over time. If you look back toward some of your current friendships and old friendships, some of them you may have quite a bit in common, some you may not. I look back into relationships in my life. One particular one that I'm thinking about right now is I'm friends with my son's nanny, who nannied him when he was a baby to when he was 2 before we moved to Chicago for a few years. So on the outset, we don't have that much in common. Besides, we are both Chinese language speakers. She's, a lot older than me. She doesn't speak English that well, which is actually one reason I had hired her so that, she can speak Chinese to my son and for him to learn more Chinese as a baby. And at the outset, we don't have a lot in common, but we spend a lot of time together over those 2 years. We have some common goals like making sure the kid is safe and happy. And we just developed this really great bond. I still see her, and she's just an important person in my life. When I think about who am I connected with, I feel a real sense of connection with her. It's funny, when the pandemic first hit, I remember calling her up and saying, "Oh, you gotta be careful." And I think she hasn't caught on yet to some of the things. And her husband has some health issues, so I want to instill a sense of urgency in them on social isolation and make sure they're safe. And then I brought like a little medical kit of some of the things that it's a little harder to get. So I said, okay, just stay put. I'm going to come over. We're going to be distance. I'll put it on your driveway. At that time, everybody feel like everything is germy, so we didn't want to get close or touch things that other people touch. So I said, I'll just leave out on your driveway, and then you can wipe it and then take it back home. And she said, all right, fine. And then when she met up with me, we sort of shouted across the driveway. And then she left a box of masks for me. I'm like, what? Masks were, at one point, they were like gold because nobody had masks early in pandemic. Everybody was making these cloth masks. We're buying them on Etsy. So she left me this box of surgical masks. I'm like, where did you get it? She said, well, I bought a whole bunch of them because a relative in China asked for them a month ago. And I bought them, and then they had more supply, so I never got around to mailing it to them. I was just flabbergasted. I was just so touched that she was sharing her gold with me. So anyways, we have this really great relationship and this sense of connection, again, purely just because we spend a lot of time together. Those 2 years when my son was a baby, and I was sort of in a dark place because I had postpartum depression. Now, I never really confided that in her until years later. I mentioned like, oh, remember, I was actually not feeling great. But just having her there being a nice, supportive presence was a lot. And I really appreciate her in my life. So regularity interaction sometimes really trumps how exactly good of a match that friend is. With that said, how do you develop that regularity interaction? You may have a busy life. So the next thing I'm going to say is you need to be extremely strategic. I'm not saying you need to be strategic about or toward your friends. You need to be very, very strategic about creating that space and time for those regular interactions. Because if you're a busy person, your schedule is probably like some kind of puzzle to solve. How do you find those time and integrate them in a smooth way into your life? That's how you become strategic. And strategic in the way that you can spend enough time with your old friends, your existing friends, or family, or whoever you want to deepen that relationship with. But also, you have these ways to integrate new people, friends or other, into your life in a way that's persistent. Because what is difficult about new friendships is if you meet someone, as I mentioned before, you may ask them out to coffee or dinner or something, but then you need to keep on doing that. And then there's friction. If, is it my turn to ask them? Is it their turn? Next thing you know, things kind of peter out. But you can find a way to hook them into your existing platform, things you do regularly. You have a much better chance of having things work out. In fact, one of the most connected person I interviewed actually used that word, strategic. I was like, thank the Lord, someone else feel that same thing. I was like really happy because I feel a little self-conscious about thinking about things in such a systematic way. And when he mentioned it, I'm like, all right, someone else feel that it's important to be strategic about this aspect. So I was really relieved, actually. So he's someone I met through the Moth storytelling community. And he has, over the years, consciously developed all these activities or platforms to regularly interact with his old friends and also to hook new friends into his life. Actually, hook sounds not like the right word. It sounds a little nefarious, and I don't think that's a word he used. He might have used slot people into his life. I don't remember, actually. I'm thinking integrating, but that's a little too enmeshed. Maybe anchor, so ways to anchor people into his life. That sounds okay, so we'll go with that for now. For example, he took up golf kind of late in life, and he regularly go golfing with his old friends. So that's a couple hours you get to spend out in the open air, walking around or karting around. I don't know exactly what he does, and chat for a few hours, having some quality time together. And if he meets someone new, he might ask, hey, do you play golf? Do you if you don't play golf, do you want me to show you how to play golf? Try it out. So that's a way to bring someone into his life in a regular, repeated fashion. He's also a Patriots season ticket holder. Now, as I'm saying this, I know I'm painting him into this sort of idle, wealthy person. It's actually not at all. He has a full-time job. He's a school teacher, and he actually have other consulting gigs. He's also a writer, does a million things. Now, granted, he is one of these unusually, sickeningly productive people. And he just chooses to spend his time and money the way he does. He prioritizes having good times and then also hanging out with friends. So he has Patriots season tickets. He will bring people to watch games. They will tailgate together. So that's another regular activity to do probably half the year during football season. He also attends moth storytelling shows. He lives in Connecticut, so he will drive 2 hours to Boston or 2 hours to New York City to attend some of these shows. And he will always bring one or two friends with him on the car ride. So 2 hours there, 2 hours back. That's 4 hours you get to spend together. That's a lot of quality time to dive into some good conversations. Again, that's a somewhat regular activity. He's also a writer, so he has a writing critique circle. Over time, they can help one another become better writers. So that's another opportunity to get to know people. He also has a book club between him, his partner, and a few different couples that they get together and discuss books on a monthly basis. So these are regular, persistent ways to interact with old friends. Then if he meets someone new, he can ask, oh, do you like football? Want to go see a Patriots game with me? Or want to drive to the moth? Do you write? What about reading book together? So there's a lot of ways to anchor new people into his life because he's already created these platforms that he enjoys and is a repeat regular thing. So now that we've gone through an example of someone who's very connected and the connection platforms that he's developed over the years to deepen friendships and make new friends, I guess the next question is, what can we do? Where do we start? And particularly if you're getting a little discouraged listening to his example, thinking, look, I don't have time to go to football games or drive to another state for these shows. What can I do? Now, I'll promise you that if you get creative here, you will find ways and room for these regular interaction. It might take a little more work and creativity, but I think this is where we do put in the work. Actually, that's another commonality of people who are highly connected. Many of them have explicitly expressed that I put in the work. Someone else said, I work at it. Another person said he's very deliberate about the time he put into nurturing his friendships and relationships. So it does take some work, but this is where we do put in the work to solve our scheduling puzzle and to get creative about constructing these platforms. All right, so let's begin by thinking about things that we can do as individuals. And they roughly fall into 3 different categories. We can examine things that you already do and find room to create better platforms there. Number 2 is we can join existing platforms and structures. And number 3 is we can create our own very custom platform and structures. So let's just take them one at a time and get to some details and examples. All right, so let's first take inventory of things that you already do on a daily or weekly basis. Well, number 1 is most of us work, right? So workplace, that could be a place to find the connection and to deepen some of our existing relationships and potentially make new friends. And indeed, many of the very connected people I've spoken with has a very close friend at work. Now, if you're starting to have some objections, you might be like, well, people I work with fall into a very different demographic than me. Maybe you're the youngest person at a place where everyone is married, and right after work they just go home to their families, right? That you can feel a little more isolated. So that can definitely happen. Or another objection could be, I'm an executive. It's difficult to make friends and to sort of cross that line with people that are my subordinates. That could definitely be the case as well. I feel like that could be a whole different episode, just talking about workplace, friendships, and relationships. I'm not going to too fine details right here, but just to alert you that, hey, work is a place that we spend a lot of time in. And if we can pay a little bit more attention and develop better relationship there, it doesn't even have to be having a best friend. If in general we can create better relationships that will really elevate our day-to-day experience. So that's one thing about work. Another thing about work I'll bring up, especially in these days of work from home, co-working. Find people that are friends or neighbors that might want to physically sit together and work. Not every day necessarily, but it could just be for 1 or 2 days a week. You could definitely join a co-working space. But even on a more ad hoc basis, I sometimes will go to the local cafe and drag one of my neighbors or friends nearby to go co-work together. Once we get there, we might chit-chat a little bit, but for the most part, we try to focus on our work. And then afterwards, we may eat lunch together and then do a little more socializing. And it really just break up the week and inject a lot of good social energy into a day. So if you do remote work, think about if there are opportunities to work yourself into a co-working situation. Another thing that might be on your weekly calendar already is exercise. Now let's ask, how can we make exercising more social? Maybe you already go to a gym. Are there opportunities to coordinate schedule and to work out with a friend? I know sometimes there's just that little bit of upfront inconvenience. And oftentimes, myself included, I will opt for the quick, convenient thing rather than the intentional interaction. So I think that's where we can pay a little bit of attention and ask, well, if I can just coordinate 1 day a week where I exercise with someone else, that might be a starting step. Perhaps you're a runner. One person I interviewed regularly runs with his teenage kids. That's a time for them to discuss what's happening that week and get into sometimes a deeper discussion. If you don't have a regular exercise routine currently and I just make you feel bad, I'm sorry. But this next category thing we all do, which is eating. So how can we make eating more social? Is there a way to structure a every Friday lunch? Maybe it's at work, or maybe it's with a local friend. Maybe it's a Thursday night dinner, right? It could be with the same person or with new people. If we can block that time out of our calendar, it's a little easier to make happen. All right, so the next type of activity that might be in your life already is reading. You may need to read for work, you might read for pleasure. One obvious way is a book club, something that meets on a monthly basis with persistent themes. But then it's not restricted to that. You can even form a ad hoc book club. For instance, recently I was thinking about reading this book called Drawdown. It's about 100 different climate action strategies. Now, the book fall into this category of book I want to read and I should read, but it's been sitting on my pile of books for, 9 months, probably 9 months, a year now. Keep bugging me, that, it's one of my aspirational reads. I always pass by it and pick a more fun book that I'm naturally drawn to. But, it's something that's important. I want to get to it. So I reached out to a out-of-town friend who actually work in the alternative energy sector. When I caught up with her, I brought up the idea, hey, you want to read this one book with me? I can't get myself to read it. If you read it with me, we can discuss it. And she readily agreed. Now, I have to admit, I'm the one that's been kind of tardy. After she agreed to read the book, I delayed our book club discussion several times, partly actually due to this particular project that I'm obsessed with, the Connection Project. So it's happening probably next month, fingers crossed. But if you have something that you want to read, it could be an article or a book. Think about, is there anyone else in your life that may want to read it? And then you can have a discussion. Again, it takes a little bit of thinking, planning, and organizing to make it happen. But the more time we practice it and the more benefit we start getting from those activities, I think the more encouraged we are to try that again. Another reading related social activity. Now, this might be too weird for you or unconventional, but I thought I'd mention it here. So sometimes in the evening after dinner, I might just read on my laptop or read a book. And I thought, well, I could sit here and read with my family, or I can go read it in a friend or neighbor's house. So I brought up this idea with a neighbor, and they're pretty busy. They have a couple of kids and, both have time-consuming full-time jobs. So it's hard for us to find time to hang out. So I throw out the idea, hey, what if I just came and plopped down in your living room and read after dinner sometime? And they were receptive to it. So I tried it once or twice. Theoretically, there's nothing wrong with it. Obviously, you don't want to do that if you have to drive 30 minutes across town to plop down in someone's living room. They may or may not have time to hang out. But if they're a neighbor, if they're just next door, there's very little friction to giving that a try. The reason I brought that up is to do things that may not be part of the social norm. If it makes sense, I say just do it, give it a try. It may work, it may not, but at least it sends the message that I want to hang out and I'm willing to try weird things. So then I think it gives other people permission to do things a little differently and to know that you're receptive to more unconventional ways of going about things. So I think that there's something worthwhile about that. Another type of event you might see on your calendar is travel and vacation. Now, this might not be on your weekly calendar, but most of us take a week-long vacation every year, and we may do some weekend trips throughout the year. Dan has a group of 10 high school friends. Actually, a few of them he's known since kindergarten. They do a long weekend trip every year. I find myself very envious of that because I moved to the States when I was 13. While I'm still in touch with 3 of my girlfriends from elementary school, I only get to see them every 3 or 4 years. That said, one of my really memorable experiences on these trips back was a trip I took with one of my friends. She and I went to the Shaolin Temple. Growing up, I was really obsessed with martial arts movies. Me, my brother, and my cousin watched so many martial arts movies. I remember you see people leaping backwards onto walls. When I was little, I used to practice leaping onto benches backwards. Little did I know, they just reverse someone jumping down and they just reverse the film. But in any case, I remember that trip still really fondly. We had so much fun together. We took this long train ride from Beijing. I think the temple is about 10-hour ride from Beijing. Her aunt lived in Zhengzhou, which is a city not too far from the temple. So we went and visited her aunt and then spent 2 days in the temple area. It was awesome. I still remember it fondly. So this was back before either of us had kids. After you have kids, there's still opportunities to travel with friends and then perhaps also with your family. If you have another family that the spouses and kids get along, it might be worth it to go through all the logistical details and arrange to vacation together. Particularly if they're friends that you don't get to see a lot. Maybe they move out of town. it's a great opportunity to spend some concentrated time with remote friends. The last type of existing activity on our calendar I'll mention is entertainment. Are there ways to make entertainment more social? If we're vegging to watch Netflix anyways, can we veg with a friend or a neighbor? I know we did a lot of that during the pandemic, like remote watch parties. But now that we're back together, maybe there are ways to, say, set aside a monthly movie night or every Sunday Netflix night. You may already play video games. Could you coordinate with people to play more video games together? I'm not saying we should all be addicted to screens, but if you're going to play sometime anyways, it might be better to find more time to play with friends. So that sums up the type of things we already do. And the idea is to pull out your weekly calendar and see what's already on there, the different category of things that you do. And for each type of thing you do, ask yourself the question, how can I make this more social? Next category of things is chances are things you're more familiar with and thought about it already. This fall into that hobby interest category. Clubs, organized sports, or classes that you can take to pursue some interest or get better at something. I won't linger much here. One thing that comes to mind is a couple years ago, Dan and I went to Denmark, just two of us, and I saw everywhere on the street there are these handball courts at 5 o'clock. You'll see them all full of adults. They're just out there playing sports. And they're very serious too. There'll be whistles, and you can tell people are yelling or having a good time. You know, they take their team sports seriously. Of the many people I interviewed, and of the many very connected feeling people, a high percentage of them pursue some type of team sports, whether it's soccer, softball, tennis, or pickleball. Perhaps replace more training and exercise that would do otherwise, or going to the gym, for example. Other type of groups to join that regularly hold events are clubs, or you can take a class, or it could be your local chapter of your college alumni association. Chances are you've thought about these already, so I'm not going to belabor it. But I will mention this one last type of institutions to join. It's a bit controversial, so I'm going to tread very lightly here, and that is your local faith institution. I find it very ironic, first of all, as an atheist non-believer, I'm telling other people to go back to the church. But I guess if you broke from your faith, not through a fundamental principle, but you just elapsed or life got busy and you no longer attend regular religious services, consider going back to that community, because the older I've gotten, the more I've come to admire from afar the religious practice that's been built and perfected over thousands of years, the practice that really builds community. First of all, you have a weekly mass psychotherapy session with the priest, rabbi, or pastor that talk about a particular topic that really make you think. And again, it's a deeper discussion. You get a weekly pause to think about the bigger picture in life. Not to mention there could be additional Bible study groups that you can participate in. Also, as part of the religious organization, there's often service, community work that you can participate in. Someone else is already organizing it, and you just have to show up and do a meaningful activity together with other people. It also provides service to all the church members, so you can help one another, which really fosters community, connection, and friendship. So I throw this out there just as something to consider and mull over if you were raised in a faith tradition. So that's what I'm going to say about joining outside groups that provide a platform for regular social interaction. The third option for building regular interaction is to create your own event. So here are some examples. The first thing that come to mind relate to exercise. I read in a book this past year about this professional woman who's very busy, live in New York City. She and 5 of her busy professional girlfriends actually hired a personal trainer so that they can exercise together, all 6 of them, in Central Park. And this personal trainer will design exercises that is ideal for the interests of that group, and also schedule it at a time that fit everyone's schedule. So I was really impressed when I heard that example because it's something I never would think to do. It feels a bit extravagant to hire a personal trainer, but if you do have the resource to do that, why not? Sometimes we don't think about the things that are just a little bit out of ordinary, or maybe they just seem a little extravagant. But if we do have financial resources, one of the best things to throw that resource at is connecting in our social life, especially if you are already trading off your time for money. Another example is like some of the things we do here. We have a monthly poker night. So Dan is a big poker player. We have our local neighborhood friends and acquaintances here for a monthly poker game that run from September till May. And then some other neighbors have more ad hoc poker nights that invite us to go. So whenever I meet a new person in the neighborhood, I can ask, hey, do you play poker? Do you want to give it a try? So that's a new way to anchor new friends into a existing repeated activity. So give us time and opportunity to get to know one another. Another thing I got into is storytelling. I got a little obsessed with it for a while. I read books on it. I took workshops. I was just go around storytelling. And I did a couple of Moth Story Slams. Now, around storytelling, I created this social event I call Scotch and Stories. I put the Scotch in there just to signal, look, this is not your kid storytelling night. So Scotch and Stories, it's a homegrown version of Moth. After a 5-minute story, you feel like you really get to know that person in a much deeper way. So I think that's the beauty of that event. So when I meet someone new in the neighborhood, I can ask them, hey, are you interested in storytelling? You want to tell a story? Or if not, come listen to stories at the next story night. That's another way to anchor more people into my life. If you have an interest or hobby for which external group doesn't already exist, then it might be a good idea to create one on your own. And if you are an introvert, so here is something to think about. Of the introverts I interviewed, many of them have mentioned having good connections through a hobby. In particular, hobbies that are more niche-y. In fact, the more niche, the better. Because if you think about it, if you have a hobby of watching football, half the population may like watching football. So it doesn't really bring out people who are just like you. If you're an introvert, it takes more energy to get to know someone. So having a shared activity make it a little easier. In contrast, if your interest is turn of the century film from Spain, the type of person that's also interested in it will be a very small slice of the population, therefore bringing people that are more like you together. Now, if you find yourself thinking, look, I don't have time to organize these groups or have these persistent monthly events, well, maybe think about it in terms of a group of people. So over time, one goal is to establish a group of friends so that maybe one person organize a 4th of July barbecue, another person organize a Oscar watching night, another person does the New Year Eve party, another person does a monthly poker game. Over time, there will be enough persistent interaction with that group, and that's a good place to work ourselves into. So to summarize, today we examine all kinds of ways to build more regularity of interaction into our lives, whether it's examining things we already do, like taking walks, can we walk with a neighborhood friend, right? So looking at things we already do that are regular activities on our calendar, bring more socialness into it. Or thinking about, are there outside groups, clubs, organized sports that I can join so that I can get into a regular rhythm with a group of people with similar interests or similar goals. And finally, to create our own structures that enable regular interaction. I hope all the ideas we talked about today have got your gears turning about how to build more regularity of interactions into your day-to-day life. If you have any questions, feedback, or ideas, let me know.